My mother told me they ought to buy me a ship and good oars. I ought to go with Vikings standing up in the ship. Steer the good ship, sail into harbor, kill one man after another. My mother told me they ought to buy me a ship and good oars. I ought to go with Vikings standing up in the ship. Steer the good ship, sail into harbor, kill one man after another. Hello, friends. You might be familiar with a song that's been popular and been redone several times. Some people are calling it a sea shanty, others a Viking song. It starts with, "My mother told me." Well, Professor Crawford, a Norse specialist and translator, recently put up a video and gave a more current translation of the poem that song is based off of. It's a story about a boy who just committed his first murder, and his father was upset with him, but his mother sees it as a sign of his future greatness. So when his mother tells him this, he recites back this poem. It goes, "My mother told me they ought to buy me a ship and good oars. I ought to go with Vikings, standing up in the ship, steer the good ship, sail into harbor, kill one man after another." Heathenry, Norse pagan history and modern practices. We will discuss Norse paganism, including the history of the Norse people and ways to practice today. Let's discuss the history of the Norse and their religions. Who were the Norsemen? What are Vikings? What was life like then? How did the average person interact with the gods and other entities? We will discuss what little we know about the history, life, and religions of the Norse people. When I say Norse or Norsemen, I am referring to the old Scandinavian and Germanic peoples. The most common era in history that is associated with the Norse is the Viking Age. 793 to 1066 AD is defined as the period when the Norsemen, known as Vikings, undertook large-scale raiding, colonizing, conquest, and trading throughout Europe and reached North America. Norse, Norseman, Viking, heathen. These words are often used interchangeably, but they don't all mean the same thing. Norse literally means north, so the Norse are the people of the north, and Norsemen are Northmen. Viking literally means raider. They would go Viking, meaning they would go on raids. This was not the name of the people, but the activity of raiding and conquest. Other people referred to them as Vikings to identify them as a threat. To call someone a Viking would be like calling someone a criminal. The people who settled most of Scandinavia and Germany at the time didn't label themselves as Norse or Viking. They were just the people, and everyone else were other people. Heathen was a word for country folk. It only gained religious meaning in the modern day. This was a very different time. Life was difficult, especially in the harsh northern climates. Society was divided into a three-tier social structure of enslaved people, peasants, and elites. The Norse were not a united people. Common rulers were military warlords called Drotten, who were selected from warriors based on merit and only in power during wartime, and subject to assassination if they gained too much power. In peacetime, there were kings, selected from the elite class, and they traveled throughout the region and met people in halls built in part for that purpose. These kings often lost power to regicide. Most provinces were largely autonomous of the kings and self-sustaining. The Norse did not have many holy buildings separate from other structures, like churches. Instead, the central gathering place of many villages was a great feasting hall. This was a common place of worship, but also for government and the community. When living in a relatively lawless society, the common ethic of the times were also different. Going Viking was not a major part of everyday life, but it was seen as an honorable endeavor if it brought wealth back to the family. Strength was required to keep what you had, and family and community ties were highly valued, as they provided greater strength and safety. A common perspective: if I harm someone, my family may be harmed in retribution. And if I am harmed, I know my family will take revenge. Fear of retribution governed most activities, and laws were only as effective as their enforcement. It was acceptable for a family to demand payment or other compensation when wronged, to prevent continual feuding. And once the compensation was accepted, the matter was closed. This could include compensation if someone were killed. The Norse people were a seafaring culture, relying on fish and trade as much as hunting and farming. In fact, it would be very difficult for them to survive without bringing in outside resources. This need drove them to explore and settle many places. When the Norsemen found another culture, they would exchange goods. When trading was not possible, that's when they would go Viking and raid other settlements. The Norse first settled Greenland in the 980s. From Greenland, they sailed west and found North America, calling it Vinland. There are accounts of trade with the native peoples. This picture is Leif Erikson traveling to North America by Norwegian nationalist painter Christian Krogh. Norsemen sailed around Spain into the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. They also had at times trade routes reaching into the Middle East. Ancient Norse religion. What little we know about the ancient lore and religious practices of the Norse people has survived in stories written down much later by scholars and poets during the early Christian era, and accounts from outside groups like the Romans. Some aspects of the Norse religion and myth are very old, but they did not exist in isolation. Beliefs and myths were shared and blended with other cultures they came into contact with, including the Celts, Romans, and even the Arabs. To learn some things about ancient practices, we can look to the language. Ve means a sacred place. Some accounts describe sacred groves. Vigja means to bless. There are stories of Thor blessing with his hammer Mjolnir. A bloat is an act of sacrifice or worship. The act of giving sacrifice is brota, and something given in sacrifice is bloti. Commonly, these sacrifices were made as transactional offerings. These usually included an animal offering in exchange for some kind of boon. Horger was a pile of stones used for sacrifice. The number 9 was a very sacred number. Accounts of temples, called Hof, only came later in texts from Christian sources describing the Norse. Symbol were ritual feasts with both religious and communal purposes, often including boasting and swearing oaths. Accounts of prayers are very few. Seder means a custom or religious practice or magical practice. The practice of Seder is believed to be a form of magic, which is related to both the telling and shaping of the future. Practitioners of Seder, primarily women called vulva, may have been religious leaders of the Viking community. Many of the myths are sometimes seemingly contradictory. These myths came from stories that changed and shifted from one teller to the next, and from one place to the next. A skald was a kind of bardic storyteller and historian. What little we know about the gods come from these myths, stories shared orally, and differently in different places and times. Different regions honored different gods, or honored gods in different ways. The gods best known today are Thor, Loki, and Odin, thanks in no small part to our modern media. Let's bust the myth that the Norse gods represented function, like Thor as the god of thunder and Odin as the god of war. They were not really the gods of anything, just gods. Many of the gods in the Norse pantheon did have their specializations, and many of them also share abilities. They are complex and flawed characters, not simple archetypes. Odin was the sorcerer, the poet, the inspiration of kings, the protector of outcasts, a seducer and a trickster. Thor, like his comic book character, was also thought of as a hero, the defender of the common man and friend of humans. He was strength and violence, war and prosperity, the strongest of the gods hitting with the might of a lightning strike. He is joyful and friendly, brave and proud, but also quick to temper, gullible and naive. Loki was both a valued ally and an adversary at times. Yggdrasil, the world tree, was the central aspect of their concept of the cosmos. It was the central pillar holding together the universe, connecting the 9 worlds. We exist on Midgard, and the gods on Asgard. The gods were seen as greatly powerful, but they lived in Asgard, in another world. People didn't pray to the gods all the time. It's more common for people in their everyday life to interact with all the other kinds of beings, invisible neighbors in the world around them. They believed in many beings, creatures, and spirits of the land, like elves, trolls, the undead, and many kinds of natural spirits and regional guardians. For some, offerings were made. For others, places avoided. These beings could be helpful or harmful, and are much like the Fae we are familiar with in fairy tales and folklore. The ancestors. It was very important to be close to the family and the honored dead. Not everyone got a grave. Only important people, worth remembering like heroes. Female ancestral protectors were sometimes known as Disir. Your luck was a product of your ancestors' deeds, like ancestral karma. Ancestors could be called upon to help improve this luck. Let's bust another myth. The myth is all Viking warriors who died in battle went to Odin's Hall, Valhalla. The truth is, only the very best warriors were selected for this afterlife. And first, Freya gets to take her half of the fallen warriors to her hall. Only then the remainder go to Odin's Hall, Valhalla. Unlike popular portrayal in later poetry and sagas, the Valkyries were not beautiful, angelic figures who swooped in to collect the fallen warriors. The Valkyries were personifications of war, unleashed upon the battlefield. They had name meanings like sword time, spear noise, and other names of terror, death, and the loud noises of battle. Valkyries are also described as Odin's Disir. The majority of people, men and women, go to Hell's Hall in their afterlife. This was not a terrible place, more of a continuation of life. But those who were lost at sea were taken by the goddess Rune, dragged down by her fishing net. The Norse concept of the soul has multiple parts. Part of the soul moves on to the afterlife. Part of the soul could be reincarnated, usually within the family line. That was the overview of the Norse pagan history. Continue learning. I have a long list of the sources that I've pulled on and used to learn the things that I've shared today, including authors Jackson Crawford, Neil Gaiman, Galina Kraskova, Patricia M. Lefebvre, Daniel McCoy, Stephen Pullington, Ryan Smith, and Ben Wagner. I also found a lot of content on YouTube from creators Ocean Keltoy, Arith Hardner, Jackson Crawford, and some from the Grimfrost Academy. Websites I pulled from: Declaration 127, Norse Mythology for Smart People, ThoughtCo, and Nordic Culture. Please share your own personal gnosis, questions, or anything else. I will try to answer, or we can find the answers together. Thank you.